The scripture this morning comes from the book of Acts, which was written by the physician Luke, a companion to the Apostle Paul. And he was the next generation after Jesus' time, and most scholars believe that he was a Syrian Gentile, well-educated, living in the last vestiges of what they call the Hellenistic influence. He's also known for his concern for the poor and the disenfranchised, and it's one of the reasons why he is my favorite writer in the Bible. And so please receive these words from the book of Acts, verses 17, verses 22 through 28. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship. And this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heavens and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far off from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. And as some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring." That was Acts 17, verses 22 through 28. Last week, a friend of mine who works HR in a decent-sized company shared that a Christian lodged a complaint saying that a Muslim in their office who was fasting was doing so to mock Lent. Now, there was no report of the Muslim saying, "My fasting is better than your fasting." No, it was the mere act of fasting. That was the offense. My HR friend, after picking their jaw up off the floor, crafted a thoughtful response, which included an explanation of what is Ramadan. Now, I almost didn't use this example because it's a little too on the nose, but for the purposes of a homily, any source of differences could have worked, but this was the example that landed so beautifully and so timefully in my lap. So when I consider this scenario, I think the complainant reduced it to one of those Boolean flow charts, but a box of one. Is their fasting all about you? Yes, no. Because even in this myopic reduction, there were missed opportunities. No, ask them about their fasting. Are you sure about the yes? Try consulting Google. And on a whim, I actually, in response to my friend, I did just that. I entered, "Are the Muslims mocking me by fasting?" And Google's response, "No, Muslims are not mocking you by fasting. Fasting during Ramadan is a sacred act of worship, self-discipline, and spiritual reflection commanded by the Quran, designed to foster gratitude, empathy for the needy, and devotion to God. It is a personal religious obligation, not an action directed at others." The Borderlands, for years, the thoughtful-minded among us have sought to define their own personal boundaries and to respect the boundaries of others. Yet in times of heightened tension, those boundaries can become rigid borders. Suddenly, anything on the other side of that border is not just the other. It becomes a clear and present danger. The real clear and present danger during such times is that in our human condition, we tend to conflate personal security with spiritual security. These are different things. When we are not living in the divine flow, one certainly can affect the other. But when our boundaries become borders, which in turn become hard walls, we separate ourselves from others, and in truth, we separate ourselves from the full experience of God. Metaphysically, we know that we are more than just our physical bodies, because we understand that our bodies have energetic fields and flows that extend throughout and from our bodies. Long before traditional science had a means to detect this field, it was known by many names: pranamayakosa, chi, bioplasma, and of course, the aura. And whether we realize it or not, through physical proximity, we approach one another as living Venn diagrams. A couple years ago, I went to a men's retreat, and the leader was quick to outlaw the side hug, that trusty greeting deployed by American men everywhere as the safe alternative to actual intimacy. And he was right, because that's the true power of hugs. On our energetic level, we are pressing our heart chakras together. Over the years, I've encountered many people who consider themselves empaths, and as part of my own ministry, and as part of being a better human being, I've relied on my empathy to better negotiate this life with other people. But nothing gives me pause like when I hear someone say, I can't be around this person or these people because I'm an empath. And I look back on my many decades of existence and I can say I was one of those people. But in reality, while the words were asserting a spiritual strength, those words are actually revealing a need for more spiritual discipline. Because I have a relative that I spend a lot of time with. I have a relative that I haven't spent a lot of time with recently because from my perspective, they are grumpy, disgruntled, opinionated. Time with them left knots in my stomach, and I tried as best as I could to limit our time together. And when I couldn't, sometimes I'd get up and leave the room during one of their prolonged rants over anything they found on the news or the internet. They had a nice symbiotic relationship with those two pieces of media to help fuel more being grumpy, more opinions, more being disgruntled. But this relative means a lot to me, and I want them to be happy, accepting the fact that their happiness is beyond my control. But something was different during my last visit. I found myself surprisingly, refreshingly, non-reactive. You see, over a year ago, just to deal with all the sudden changes in my own life here in Washington, D.C., I had doubled down on my spiritual disciplines like meditation and chakra balancing by regularly tapping into inner peace, balance, calm, multiple times a week. Sitting in this condition became more of a normal and rightful state for me. Now, during that visit, did we spend those days completely in open-hearted communication? No. But there were moments where my relative was on a break or was still. And because I had not been operating with my own shields up the entire time, we had a couple shared moments. Now again, as the image on the front of this bulletin demonstrates, I liken this notion of us as living Venn diagrams. Allowing my borders to overlap with another's means that I must be willing to exceed my own. Now, as part of that same men's retreat that I referenced earlier, the facilitator also arranged for us to do something that was entirely new to me. It was a Lakota sweat lodge ceremony. I'd never done one before, but here we were, about a dozen guys, that July in the high heat of Austin, Texas, and it was 98 degrees on the outside of that lodge. And we would go into this lodge, and they would shut the flap door, and they would bring in these stones that were the size of like basketballs. And they had come from an old abandoned volcano, so they really held the heat. And you would bring them in like 4 at a time, and they would glow hot red. And then they would dump water on it. The steam would wash over you. And then they chanted Lakota in the first round, and I'm like, holy smokes. And I remember my face is covered in sweat, and I would go to wipe the sweat from my face, but the palms of my hands were just as sweaty, so that did no good. And the round ended, and as they do in Lakota sweats, they open up the flap to let in fresh air and to discuss the meaning of the round. But of course, again, this was Austin, Texas in July, and it was 98 degrees. And when they opened in that flap, more hot air came in. But that was round one, and we had 3 more rounds to go. So the next round, they dropped the flap. They brought in more stones. Now there were a pile of at least 8 on there. They dropped the stones. And I had a towel with me, and I thought, well, this heat, I've got to protect myself from the heat. So I put the towel over my head, and I'm breathing, and I'm like, I need some fresh air. And I lifted up the towel, and before I could breathe, it was like the heat was a fist punching me in the face. And I realized I could not escape it. There was no place for me to feel cool. And and suddenly I had this flash. I had never experienced anything like this before. It was this personal boundary of what I could physically tolerate. My brain was saying, you have to stay in here. This is a sacred experience. You know, thousands of years, the Lakota and other people have participated in this ceremony. It's meaningful, and you've got 11 other brothers here in this lodge with you. You must be there with you. Nobody else is suffering like you do. My head said all those things, and my body said, you must get out, you must get out, you must get out. Now, there's a secret phrase that you say. It's not a secret phrase. You've heard me say it before, actually. There's a phrase you say in the lodge. If you need to get out, you can say, Aomatakiasin, or you can say it in English, all my relations. It's the safe word. And they would stop immediately and let you out. But in my panic, I could not do it. And so I did what was actually breaking a sacred tradition. I got on my back, and the frame of the inipi, which is covered in quilts and blankets, I shimmied out the back and in the dark, and went and sat down with the fire. Well, I did go back. I set up the third round and did ask permission to go back in the fourth round, and nobody said anything to me. But that stuck with me. That sensation of just hitting a tolerance level. I had never experienced anything like it before. That I physically emotionally could not stay there any longer, and this fascinated me. So when I came back to Arlington Metaphysical, I was telling my brother, Reverend Jim, about this experience. And I said, that experience, I have to go back there. I have to go back to this boundary of myself. He says, I have just the man for you. So he introduced me to Peter Beebe, who's been here before and spoke, and host a lodge sanctioned by the Lakota Nation, the Eagle Clan, out in West Virginia, about 4 hours from here. And so one Saturday, I emailed Pete, got the dates, and drove in my car out there and sat with Pete and explained to him, my experience. And I said, I understand that the purpose of the lodge is to suffer. And he stopped me and goes, who told you that? And I said, well, the facilitator at my last experience goes, absolutely not. This is a purification ceremony. And he explained this very beautiful experience, things that were not told to us at that experience about what it represented. And it was the returning to the womb of Mother Earth and being in balance with the moon and the sun. And what he didn't tell me until we got until eventually we were gathered around the fire to go in, was they had just built a brand new inipi, a new lodge, that weekend. And the tradition is that you do not do 4 rounds, you do 14 rounds. And there I sat. And yes, it was not as bad. There were no volcanic stones. They were gentle Appalachian, West Virginia stones in there. And I did sweat and survived the 16 rounds, some of which were mercifully short. But it was something that I realized when I came out of there. I realized I made a vow. And it was not even a vow. It was like, this is something I must do in the rest of my life. Whenever I felt uncomfortable, I realized that I was merely pushing up against my own boundaries. Whenever that was, I knew that meant I had to explore. And this dangerous habit, this reckless habit, has opened me to experiences, to wisdom, to medicine from new sources, new people, and sometimes allowed me to offer in return. My life is the richer for it. And at 60, I am glad to discover that I am far from settled in my ways. And as Paul warned in the scripture, when we're so consumed by our differences, we forget that God lives and moves through all of us. In truth, no matter our perceived borders, we all live and move through God. And that is how we find the God that we truly know. Imagine yourself outside. No, imagine yourself inside your home on a busy spring day. So many chores to do. TV or the radio is on, appliances making their noises, maybe the sounds of family in other rooms enjoying themselves. You step outside and you hear the noises of the neighborhood, a lawnmower, maybe one of those gas-powered leaf blowers, a roar of a motorcycle, a far-off siren. You close your eyes and you feel the wind brush across your face. You hear a dog bark a couple yards over. Just a dog being a dog. You breathe in again deeply all the way to the belly, fully. And as you slowly exhale, you feel lighter. And you realize that you are hovering above the ground. You can see that you are now above the ground, and this lightness of being fills you with calm, with peace. You breathe in again, and on the exhale you begin to rise again, slowly, freely, gently. You regard the trees swaying in the breeze, swaying to the left, swaying to the right, without a care in the world. The wind is doing what it always does, and the trees sway like trees do. Up you go, and you take in the roof of your home. Not too far off, you see children at play, adults bustling about their day, cars speeding down the streets. Smaller and smaller they grow until you see that they are parts of this larger tapestry that is your community. Each of them doing their own thing, being what they're supposed to be. Gently, calmly up you sail a little higher. You see the silver thread of the Potomac and the distant rolling hills, the water, the land, each peacefully being what it's always been. A short distance to your left, you see a perfect formation of geese. Closer and closer to you they fly, paying you no mind. Because you are just being you, doing what you're supposed to do, being who you're supposed to be. They gently migrate by, honking to one another, and off they go on their way. You survey the world around you. This earth, a patchwork quilt. The sun cutting golden rays between the clouds, bathing warmly on your face. This is your home. You are a part of its vastness, of its greatness. What a blessing. This is your home. And you are a part of its vastness, of its greatness. You orient yourself back to your community, to its streets, its people, its sounds, its smells. And gently, gently you descend back over your home, gently coming to land back to the place where you originally stood. Marvel at how beautiful your little corner of the world is, and how the rest of creation welcomes and accepts you just the way you are. Take another deep, slow breath all the way down to the root chakra, connecting you to Mother Earth, to the ancient wisdom of the Mother Earth and this human condition. Take another breath, and when you're ready, exhale and open your eyes, joining your friends once again here in the service. If you need to, just kind of move your fingers, pat your body to be fully with us once again. This meditation was inspired by a verse from Steve Taylor's poem, The Fall. And that verse is, "Relax and let yourself be cradled, amazed by the immensity of your being, beyond your body and brain, stretching everywhere without reaching, floating everywhere without moving, being without identity."